Before we begin, I'd just like to mention that while I will try to cover most of the important rules of the game, this will not be a fully comprehensive tutorial but is rather meant to introduce the most important aspects for you to be able to start a game as soon as possible. I will do my best to spoil as little of the surprises in the game, but I will touch on several important game mechanisms that will be unlocked throughout the game. Gloomhaven is a digital adaptation of the cooperative fantasy tabletop game of the same name designed by Isaac Childress. This adaptation was developed by Flaming Fowl Studios and published by Twin Sails Interactive. The following tutorial only includes the base game of Gloomhaven. Gloomhaven is a tactical game where you will play through different scenarios as mercenaries, fighting through monsters and completing objectives. The game is also campaign-based, meaning the world and your characters will evolve throughout the game by earning money for items and enchantments, making narrative choices, and leveling up your mercenaries. Most of Gloomhaven will be spent playing through scenarios that provide different enemies, objectives, and rewards. Each scenario consists of a series of rounds until your team succeeds or fails. Your team will succeed if they are able to accomplish the objective presented here on the right side of the screen, and your team will fail if you are unable to accomplish the objective, and if they get exhausted, which we'll explain later. Combat in the game is turn and card based. Each mercenary will have their own unique set of cards, which can be found here on the left side of the screen, and you can hover over each one to see their effects. At the start of each round, you'll choose 2 cards to play for each mercenary. These 2 cards will represent the actions that they will perform during the round. Each card also comes with an initiative number. These numbers will dictate in what order characters will perform their actions, with lower numbers going first. When selecting cards, the first you click on will have this glowing effect, meaning this will be the character's initiative number for the round. At the start of a scenario, you can also choose your mercenary's starting positions indicated by the highlighted spaces. Once you've chosen ability cards for all your mercenaries, the cards played by any visible enemies will be revealed, showing the actions that they will perform during the turn and their initiative as well. Here, in the top center of the screen, you'll find the turn order for the round. As an example, both of our mercenaries have lower initiative numbers, so we will act first during the round, and you can hover your cursor over the character portraits to see their played cards. Ability cards of mercenaries have a top action and a bottom action. During a mercenary's turn, they'll be able to perform the top action of one of the 2 cards chosen and the bottom action of the other. As mentioned earlier, each of these cards can have unique and varying effects. I won't be going over each card as there's quite a lot, but we should be able to tackle a few of them as we go further. And take note that you can always hover your cursor over card effects to see what they do. Scenarios in Gloomhaven are presented in a hexagonal grid, with each hex representing a single space. In our current example, the bottom action of this card will allow us to move 3 steps. This means we will be able to move this mercenary through 3 hexes. When activating a move action, you'll be able to map out the mercenary's movement before performing it. Take note that characters cannot stop in a space with an obstacle or occupied by another character, and they can move through ally characters but not enemies. In some scenarios, some spaces may have a distinct feature. These spaces can have different rules that either restricts movement, deals damage, and so on. You can always hover your cursor over these spaces to see what effects they provide. In order to avoid these effects, some move actions come with a jump ability. This allows your character to ignore the effects of special spaces and to move through enemy units as well. Scenarios are presented as a series of rooms with each room divided by doors. If a door is closed, you can use a movement point to enter the space to open the door, after which you can continue with the rest of the move action if you have any remaining movement points. Another action you'll see in a lot of cards is the attack action. The number beside the attack keyword represents the base damage the attack will do to a chosen opponent adjacent to your character. If an attack action has a range keyword, the attack can target an enemy within the indicated number of spaces, and as long as your character has a line of sight on the intended target. A character has a line of sight on another character as long as an uninterrupted straight line can be traced from and to the hexes the 2 characters are occupying. Attacks can also come with a target keyword. This indicates that the attack can target multiple enemies within the indicated range. Let's give an example to better explain these concepts. This card will allow us to attack 3 enemies that are within 3 spaces of our mercenary. We aren't able to target this enemy as the wall in between is blocking our line of sight. Some attacks have an area of effect. The gray hex represents our mercenary, with the red hexes indicating the targeted spaces. In this example, this attack can target 2 adjacent enemies. When performing an attack action, a random attack modifier will be revealed. You can find your character's attack modifiers by hovering your cursor here on the left side of the screen. Attack modifiers can increase, decrease, or even cancel the damage dealt by the attack. The dots below the modifiers indicate how many of each the mercenary currently has. Gray dots indicate how many of each modifier has already been used. Take note that when the cancel or the double damage modifier were revealed, your attack modifiers will be reset. For any attacks that target multiple enemies, an attack modifier will be drawn for each target. Some attacks can also apply a negative status on the target. For instance, this card will stun the target, meaning the affected character won't be able to perform any actions for a single turn. I won't be going over all of the statuses, but you can hover your cursor over each one to see what effect they provide. Advantage and disadvantage are 2 effects you'll encounter a lot. When attacking with an advantage, 2 attack modifiers will be revealed with the better option taking effect. Meanwhile, if attacking with a disadvantage, the worst option will take effect. I'd like to point out that when attacking an adjacent enemy with a ranged attack, you automatically gain a disadvantage. There are also items that can modify an attack. You'll find any equipped items here on the left side of the screen, and you can hover your cursor over them to see what they do. Take note that items with this symbol can only be used once per scenario. Items with this symbol can be used again after performing a long rest, which we will explain in a minute, and items without any symbol on the lower right side provide ongoing passive abilities. If you have any items that can be used for an action, it will appear here at the bottom of the screen, where you can click them to activate them. I'll explain later how to gain these items, but as an example, the Eagle Eye Goggles provides an attack action with an advantage. At this point, I'd like to mention that if you don't want to perform the written ability of your played cards, whether because you made a mistake or the game state has changed and the abilities are no longer useful, you can instead do a basic 2 damage attack as a card's top action, and or a basic 2 movement as a card's bottom action. You can also choose to skip any ability if you prefer not to do anything. Some ability cards will allow you to summon special units in an adjacent space. These units will have their own stats and will perform their actions automatically. They won't perform any actions on the turn they were summoned, but for the succeeding rounds, they will perform their actions immediately before the character who summoned them. Some cards will show an element. These are cards that either create these elements or use elements to improve an action. For example, this card will create a fire element, while this card can use a fire element to add a wound status on the target of this attack. When elements are created, they will appear here on the right side of the screen. Take note that you can't immediately use an element in the same turn they are created, as indicated by the unformed icon. The element will fully form at the end of the character's turn, where they will be available for use by any succeeding character, ally, or enemy. Elements will only last 2 rounds. If the element hasn't been used after a round, the element icon is shown as halved, meaning it will disappear if unused at the end of the current round. Some cards will show this star icon. This represents experience, which is used to level up your characters. You can find the current experience of your characters here when choosing cards for the round, and the amount needed for your character to level up. We will explain leveling up characters in a later chapter. Another action you'll find in some cards is the heal action. This allows an adjacent character to regain health equal to the indicated number, in this case 3. Like attack actions, heal actions can be ranged if it comes with a range keyword, and can appear with a target keyword as well for multiple targets. You can find the current health of each character on top of their character model. And take note, when healing, you cannot exceed a character's maximum health. Another action you'll find on some cards is the loot action. This allows your character to pick up gold and treasure within the range indicated on the action. For example, this loot action has a range of 1, meaning if activated, will loot all gold and treasure currently adjacent to our character. Take note that you can also loot gold and treasure by ending your movement on the space they are occupying. We'll explain the use of gold and loot in a later chapter. Some actions will provide defensive abilities such as Shield and Retaliate. When activated, shields will appear beside a character's health bar. They decrease any incoming damage by the number of shield icons present. On the other hand, if a character has an active Retaliate ability, the indicated amount of damage will be reflected to an adjacent attacker. Retaliate can also be ranged, meaning attackers will receive damage if they attack within the indicated range. After the abilities on the chosen cards have been carried out, the played cards will either be discarded, burned, or set aside depending on the activated ability. This is something to keep in mind when choosing cards to play at the start of the round. If the activated ability has this symbol, it will provide an ongoing ability and the card will be set aside until the end of the round, after which it will be discarded. If the infinity symbol is present on an ability, it's also an ongoing ability, but will be set aside until the end of the scenario or when the indicated condition on the ability is met. For example, this card will be set aside if the bottom ability has been activated, and will stay there until this character has been damaged 6 times. You can also check any ongoing abilities a character has on their character portrait represented by these icons, and you can hover your cursor over each one to see what they are. If this symbol is present, the card will be burned. This means that the card is removed from the game unless the character has any items or abilities that will allow them to recover burned cards. Take note that abilities with this icon means that they can never be recovered after they are burned. If none of the symbols mentioned are present, the card is discarded after using the ability. I'd like to point out that you can always check which cards are currently set aside, discarded, or burned here on the left side of the screen when choosing cards for the round. Highlighted cards indicate that these are currently set aside. Cards that are grayed out are currently discarded, cards in red have been burned, and everything else is currently available to be played for the round. To recover discarded cards, characters need to perform either a short rest or a long rest. A long rest will require an entire turn, and will provide the mercenary with an initiative of 99, which is the highest possible, which means they will act last during the round. During a long rest, the mercenary will heal 2 points of damage, recover items with the symbol mentioned earlier, and recover all discarded cards, but will have to burn one discarded card of your choice. A short rest on the other hand will not require an entire turn, but will randomly burn a discarded card. And during a short rest, if you don't like the randomly chosen card, you'll have one chance to change the card by taking 1 point of damage, after which you can carry out a turn as normal. As mentioned earlier, a scenario will end after you succeed or fail the objective. One way to fail is if all your mercenaries are exhausted. Mercenaries become exhausted if they have less than 2 unburned cards left, or if they run out of health. Once exhausted, a mercenary is taken out of the scenario, and the rest of the team will have to try and finish the objective without them. I'd like to mention that if your mercenaries get exhausted, or you fail a scenario, your characters will still get to keep any gold and experience they gained. Last thing we need to explain about scenarios are enemy units. As mentioned earlier, enemies also play cards at the start of the round that will dictate their initiative and actions. Their actions are similar to those of mercenaries that we've covered, and the actions vary depending on the type of enemy unit. When enemy units activate, they do so automatically, but they do follow certain rules in terms of which units they will target. They will always focus on the character that they can reach with the fewest number of movement. If 2 characters are in the same distance, they will choose the character who is positioned earlier in the turn order. For example, in this scenario, both of our mercenaries are 4 spaces away from the Bandit Guard Elite. So when it activates, it will choose to move closer to our Brute, who currently has a lower initiative than our Spellweaver. Take note that if an adjacent enemy unit's attack action is ranged, it will move in a way to avoid the disadvantage of ranged attacks in melee distance that was explained earlier. When attacking, enemy units have a shared pool of attack modifiers as well. You can find their attack modifiers by hovering your cursor over any enemy unit. When a mercenary is attacked by an enemy unit, you'll be presented with several options for how you'd like to take the damage. You can either take it as normal damage to the mercenary's health, you can choose to burn an unplayed card, or burn 2 discarded cards. Just to emphasize, running out of cards will exhaust a mercenary, so it's crucial to choose the right type of damage at the right time. Scenarios will almost always have a predetermined number of enemy units across all rooms. Take note that when opening a door to a new room with enemy units, they will be immediately supplied with an initiative and action. If their initiative is higher than the current active character, they will take a turn based on the current turn order. But if their initiative is lower, they will immediately take a turn after the current active character. This means that newly revealed enemies will always take a turn, so it's important to consider and strategize when to open a door to a new room. As mentioned earlier, Gloomhaven is a campaign game. At the start, you'll need to create 2 to 4 mercenaries to play as through scenarios. When creating a mercenary, first you'll need to choose which class you'd like to play. The campaign starts with 6 classes, with more getting unlocked throughout the campaign. When clicking on each option, here you'll find a summary of each class, and by clicking here, you can read through a mercenary starting ability cards. Once you've chosen a class and have given them a name, you'll be presented with two options of personal quests for the mercenary. When a mercenary's personal quest has been completed, they will retire and provide rewards such as new classes, items, and prosperity, which we'll explain in a bit. After creating a mercenary, there are several things you can check to plan out the playstyle for them. Here, you'll find their ability cards which you can hover your cursor over to read. Each class has its own limit to the number of ability cards they can bring to a scenario, and they start with a few more than the limit, so you'll have options from the start. Here, you can equip items. Items can be found in scenarios or can be bought here in the merchant. Each item has a base cost in gold, and you can find your mercenary's current gold here below their portrait. You can also sell items in the merchant for half the item's base cost. The cost of items from the merchant can be increased or decreased depending on your team's reputation, which can be found here on the upper left side of the screen. Throughout the game, you'll be presented with events where you'll need to make a decision on how you'd like to react. And based on your choices, your reputation can increase or decrease. Positive reputation can decrease the cost of items, while a negative reputation can increase it. Once you've purchased an item, you can click here to equip the item to your mercenary. Take note that some items provide negative effects on its wearer. As an example, the hide armor will add 2 -1 attack modifiers to whomever it's equipped to. In this screen, by clicking here, you'll also find your mercenary's perks. These are abilities that will change the character's attack modifiers and sometimes provide passive abilities as well. You can hover your cursor over each one to see a visual representation of the changes that each perk will make. For example, the consistency perk for our brute will remove 2 of the 5 -1 attack modifiers. You gain perks by leveling up or by acquiring 3 perk points. At the start of every scenario, you'll be presented with 2 options for battle goals that, if accomplished during the scenario, provides 1 or 2 perk points. Another location you'll find in Gloomhaven is the Temple of the Great Oak. Here, each of your characters can spend 10 gold to gain a blessing, which provides 2 temporary ×2 attack modifiers, and increase our devotion here. Once the devotion bar fills up, Gloomhaven's wealth will increase by 1. When Gloomhaven's wealth is increased, new purchasable items become available in the merchant, and aside from our devotion, Gloomhaven wealth can also be increased by completing scenarios and through some events. A location in Gloomhaven that will be eventually unlocked is the Enchantress. Here, you'll be able to attach enchantments to ability cards for a cost to make them stronger. Each enchantment costs gold and enchantment points that can be acquired by increasing Gloomhaven's wealth. For example, let's say we wanted to increase the base damage of this card. The row that indicates the attack damage of this top ability has this small dot that indicates a space for an enchantment. This means that we should be able to add a +1 attack enchantment to this ability, among other things. Another thing you'll find in Gloomhaven are city encounters. These are narrative events that present choices that will provide rewards or consequences depending on your choice. Once you've created your mercenaries, you're now ready to start adventuring. In the world map, you'll find available quests marked with icons, and you can also find these quests on the right side of the screen here. When hovering over a quest, you'll see its objective, the monsters present in the scenario, and its rewards. The last thing we haven't explained is leveling up. As mentioned earlier, your mercenaries gain experience by performing abilities with a star icon, but you can also gain experience by completing scenarios. Once a mercenary has gained enough experience, you can level them up by going back to Gloomhaven and opening the abilities panel. This button here becomes available, and after clicking it, you'll be presented with 2 new ability cards, one of which you can add to your character's arsenal. At this point, I'd like to mention that Gloomhaven's wealth will also dictate a new mercenary starting level. If Gloomhaven's wealth is 3 when you create a mercenary, the mercenary starting level will be 3 as well, and will also start with 3 times more gold. As mentioned earlier, this isn't a fully comprehensive tutorial. One of the joys of Gloomhaven is discovering its surprises on your own as you go through scenarios. I'd also like to mention that Gloomhaven is intentionally difficult, but you can change the game's difficulty here and some rules as well anytime you'd like as long as your characters are in Gloomhaven. Regardless, the information provided should be enough for you to be able to start the game knowing what you can do, what you'd like to do, and how you will go about doing those things. Thanks for watching.